The halls of the Red Keep were filled with silence. King Robert Baratheon's death had shaken the realm, but what followed was even more shocking. When the council had urged Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, to take the crown, not just as regent, but as king, he had refused at first, clinging to honor. But then everything changed. Cersei's plot to place Joffrey on the throne was revealed just in time. Littlefinger, torn between ambition and survival, exposed the truth about the boy's illegitimacy. Varys whispered secrets. Even Renly backed Ned, offering support in return for peace. And so, with chaos knocking at the gates, the lords of the realm bent the knee. They didn't want another war. They wanted stability. Ned Stark accepted the Iron Throne with trembling hands. He never wanted it. He was a man of the North, not a man of crowns and thrones. But he couldn't let a child born of incest rule the realm. He couldn't let Westeros fall deeper into lies. And so, with honor burning in his chest and the weight of winter on his shoulders, Eddard Stark became king of the Seven Kingdoms. His coronation was simple compared to others. No gold-embroidered cloaks, no lavish parades, just a solemn oath. Before the gods, both old and new, and the cold stare of his wife Catelyn, watching from a distance. She had begged him to return home, to let the South rot in its own politics. But Ned had chosen duty. He sat on the Iron Throne like it burned his soul. At first, people called him the Honest King, a man who refused bribes, punished corruption, and spoke with truth even when it hurt. Small folk loved him, but the lords were not used to a king who didn't play the game. And the game, in King's Landing, never stopped. Cersei Lannister and her children were sent to Casterly Rock under house arrest, watched day and night. Jaime Lannister was stripped of his Kingsguard title and sent to the Wall, much to Tywin's fury. The Lannisters boiled with anger, but war was avoided, for now. Littlefinger vanished after being caught lying once more. Varys remained in the shadows, whispering and watching, unsure if this new king would last long. But the true storm came from the north. Ravens arrived bearing grim news. White walkers, wildlings, death rising beyond the wall. Jon Snow wrote letter after letter from Castle Black, his words heavy with fear. Ned believed him. He knew the stories were real, but the South laughed. Dragons and ice monsters were old tales to them. Still Ned listened. He always listened. He sent men, supplies, gold. He even reached out to Daenerys Targaryen, the last living daughter of the dragon, now rising in Essos with her 3 beasts. He offered peace, even alliance. If she stayed her fire and helped fight the true enemy in the north, it was a risky move. His council screamed betrayal. The Targaryens were hated, feared. But Ned saw further. He wasn't playing for power. He was playing to save the realm, but power doesn't sleep, and Westeros doesn't forgive. Every day Ned sat the throne and heard of new whispers, lords growing restless, houses trading secrets. Tyrion Lannister was seen gathering support in the west. Stannis Baratheon, bitter and ignored, was raising ships in Dragonstone. Even Catelyn began to pull away from him, cold and distant, worried that the crown was changing him, because it was. Ned Stark, the honest man, was slowly dying, replaced by a version of himself who had to lie, to kill, to rule. When he passed judgment, now it wasn't with peace in his heart. It was with steel in his hand. He told himself it was for the good of the realm. But the whispers in the halls told another story. They called him the Wolf King. Not for his nobility, but for the cold way he ruled. Still winter was coming, and so was war. The days in King's Landing grew darker. Summer was slipping into memory, and with it the warmth that once made the city shine. Ned could feel it in his bones. Winter wasn't just coming, it was already creeping through the cracks of the realm, and he was too busy holding the pieces together to stop it. Word arrived that Stannis Baratheon had declared himself rightful king. He had refused to recognize Ned's rule, calling him a traitor to Robert's bloodline. He had no love for Joffrey or the Lannisters, but he had even less for a northern wolf wearing a southern crown. His ships began raiding the Stormlands. Small battles sparked like wildfire. Ned held the council together with grit. Renly, ever the politician, wanted peace through marriage and alliances. He proposed his own marriage to Margaery Tyrell to bring the Reach into the fold. Ned didn't trust him, but he saw the value. He allowed it, reluctantly. Meanwhile, the Lannisters began to stir in the west. Tywin Lannister refused to stay silent. House Lannister was too proud to bow to a Stark. He began fortifying castles, raising banners in secret. Ned had no proof, but he knew what was coming. In the middle of it all, Ned's children struggled to find their place in a world that no longer felt like home. Sansa, broken and disillusioned after discovering Joffrey's truth and watching her dreams burn, became quiet, distant. She barely smiled anymore. She had begged Ned to let her return to Winterfell, but he refused. It wasn't safe. Arya, on the other hand, trained in the shadows. Her needle was always with her. Her anger hadn't cooled, it had sharpened. She wandered the Red Keep like a ghost, always watching. Ned worried for her soul, but he had no time to be a father. Robb wrote from Winterfell, frustrated that he had to stay behind as Warden of the North. He wanted to stand beside his father to help rule, but Ned needed him in the North, where the true war would come. The boy was turning into a man. Too fast, too angry, too proud. And then came the Raven from the Wall. Jon Snow had gone beyond the Wall with a scouting party. Only one man returned, half frozen, raving about white-eyed corpses and a girl who walked with the dead. Jon was missing. Ned's hands trembled when he read the letter. For a moment, the Iron Throne melted away, and he was just a father again. He ordered more men to be sent to the Wall, twice as many. He wrote letters to every great house warning them the dead were real, the threat was not myth. He pleaded for unity. Most ignored him. Others laughed. One man didn't. Samwell Tarly, who wrote from Castle Black, speaking of an ancient darkness and a secret buried in Jon's blood. A name whispered in the cold, Targaryen. Ned burned the letter. He couldn't allow it. Not now, not ever. Jon's truth would destroy everything. It would make his rule illegitimate, destroy his family's name, and spark a war that would make all others look like games. So for the first time in his life, Eddard Stark buried the truth, and with it a piece of his honor, but secrets don't stay buried, not in Westeros. Tyrion Lannister returned from exile with gold and promises, rallying mercenaries and old allies. He knew how to charm and how to destroy. He began poisoning ears across the realm, whispering that Ned was hiding something, that a bastard boy held the true claim to the throne. Even worse, Daenerys Targaryen responded. She had received Ned's offer of peace. She considered it. Then she saw what happened to her family, to her brother Rhaegar, to the madness of the past, and she chose a different path. She began marching with her dragons. Across the narrow sea, ships gathered like storm clouds. In King's Landing, the people still whispered of King Ned the Honest, but behind closed doors, lords began wondering how long he could hold the realm together, because being a good man had never been enough, and now even that part of him was slipping away. Ned Stark stood on the balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay, the cold wind brushing against his face. He hadn't slept. Again, below, ships were being loaded with grain and weapons, heading for the wall. The rest of the realm still ignored the danger in the north, but Ned couldn't. He couldn't abandon Jon, not even now. Maester Luwin's letters were clear. There was no sign of his bastard son beyond the wall, only scattered sightings, rumours, whispers of a wolf in the snow leading wildlings instead of killing them. Some believed Jon had turned. Ned refused to believe it. But doubt was a poison, and it was spreading. Meanwhile, the south was growing restless. Lords grumbled that their grain went north instead of feeding their people. Others complained about heavy taxes Ned imposed to support the wall's defense. The king's justice was fair, but harsh. Many missed Robert's wine-soaked feasts and easy favors, but Ned had no time for feasts or favors. He was too busy putting out fires. Tensions with Stannis escalated. The Blackwater's mouth had become a battleground of spies and assassins. Men loyal to Dragonstone had been caught sneaking through the city. Others disappeared quietly in the night. Renly, now Lord of the Reach by marriage, begged Ned to strike first. But Ned refused. He didn't want civil war that changed when a ship washed up with the mutilated bodies of northern men. One bore the direwolf sigil, a threat, a warning. Ned ordered Stannis named traitor and declared open rebellion. Ships were sent. Soldiers followed. The crown was now at war. Again, Robb Stark marched south with 10,000 men to crush Stannis at Storm's End. He was young, bold, and too eager to prove himself. Catelyn tried to stop him, but Robb wouldn't listen. He wanted to fight beside his father, to show Westeros the strength of the north, and far in the east Daenerys sailed. Her dragons were no longer small. They soared above her fleet like fiery gods. She sent no words, no threats, just silence and fire. Cities along the Slavers' Bay burned behind her. She didn't come to talk, she came to reclaim. Varys warned Ned that the dragons would not stop in Essos. They would come to Westeros, and they would not kneel to a Stark. Ned didn't fear dragons. He feared what they would awaken. The people of King's Landing began whispering Daenerys's name. The Dragon Queen, they called her, breaker of chains. To them, she was a savior, a return to the old Targaryen bloodline, a fire to melt the cold wolf on the throne. Ned ordered the City Watch to silence anyone caught spreading dragon propaganda. It only made things worse. Even his allies began to pull away. Renly started making his own deals behind Ned's back. Varys had gone quiet. The Tyrells smiled during council meetings, but their loyalties shifted like the wind. Even Ser Davos, once a trusted voice, questioned Ned's decisions. And then there was Sansa. She stood before Ned one cold morning, her eyes full of anger. "You told me lies," she said, holding the burned remains of a letter. "About Joffrey."
About love, about what happens to people when they speak the truth. She had found out about the silent executions, the spies Ned had hanged, the people he'd punished for doubting him. "You're not the father I remember," she whispered.
Before walking away, Arya disappeared the same day, her room empty, her sword gone. No one saw her leave. No one could find her. Ned ordered the gold cloaks to search every corner of the city, but she was a shadow now. And as the walls of his world began to crack, another letter arrived from Samwell.
"Tarly," it said only 3 words. "He's still alive." No name, no location, just that. Jon Snow lived, but was he still a son of Stark or something else?
Ned held Sam's letter in his hand for hours, staring at those 3 words over and over again. He's still alive. Part of him felt hope, but it was buried beneath dread. He had feared Jon might be dead, but the truth could be worse. Jon was alive, yes, but where? Doing what? And if Sam had written to him in such secrecy, then whatever Jon had become, it was no longer simple. There was no time to think, no time to breathe. Storm's End had fallen. Robb Stark's forces had been ambushed on the march by Stannis' fleet, reinforced with sellswords from across the narrow sea. Robb was injured, not fatally, but badly, and taken back to Riverrun to recover. The war against Stannis had stalled, and for the first time Ned saw fear in the eyes of his bannermen. The North was strong, but not invincible.
Not anymore. Worse still, Tywin Lannister finally moved. After months of silence, the lion roared. With Cersei and Jaime disgraced, Tywin sought to restore his family's power the only way he knew, by war. He allied with what was left of the Baratheons,
And even whispers claimed he sent envoys to Daenerys. He didn't care who ruled, only that the Starks fell. And the people? The small folk turned cold. Fires were lit in the streets, not from celebration, but rebellion. Starvation crawled through the alleys of Flea Bottom. They said King Ned fed the wall, but not his people. They said he punished words like crimes, that he ruled with a sword and not with love. The honest king had become the Iron Wolf, and Ned felt it. In his own soul, every choice he made twisted his insides. He no longer looked at himself in the mirror of his chambers. His reflection wasn't
a man anymore, and just a collection of burdens. Catelyn stopped sharing his bed. They didn't fight, not with words.
But silence was louder. Their eyes rarely met. She grieved the Robb she could not reach, the daughters she could not hold, and the husband who now wore a crown heavier than stone. But Ned still had one purpose: stop the chaos before the realm
burned. He summoned Davos Seaworth for counsel. Davos, still loyal, still honest in a world of lies, stood before Ned and said, "You're not the only one who wants peace, Your Grace, but peace won't come from your sword, not anymore. What would you have me do? Ned asked. Send someone to find Jon, Davos said. If the North is truly in danger and Jon Snow knows why, we need him, crown or no crown. Ned hesitated. Every part of him screamed against it. If Jon's blood was what Sam hinted at, if the truth came out. But what choice did he have? He nodded. Find him. And so a ship was sent, cloaked in secrecy. A black sail, a lone captain. Orders to go north of the wall, find Jon Snow, and return without a word spoken. Meanwhile,
Daenerys Targaryen reached Dragonstone. She did not conquer it. The people welcomed her. They were tired of the war, tired of kings and wolves and lions. They bent the knee without a fight. She stood on the shores of Westeros for the first time since she was a child. Behind her, Drogon roared into the sky. Before her, the 7 kingdoms lay waiting. She did not declare war, not yet. Instead, she sent a raven to King's Landing. It carried only 2 lines. Your throne is built on ashes. I will bring fire. The raven from Dragonstone sat untouched on Ned's table for 2 days before he gave it a single glance. He already knew what it would say. Daenerys didn't need armies of scribes to deliver threats. She had dragons, and fire didn't negotiate. She will burn everything, Varys said softly from the shadows. Even the good men, especially the good men. Ned didn't respond. He just stared at the fire in the hearth, thinking about how warmth had become such a rare feeling. It wasn't just the cold of winter creeping into the stones. It was the cold of decisions, of duty, of watching your own soul wither piece by piece. His hand closed around the dagger on the table. It wasn't ceremonial. It was real. Steel, simple, northern. Sometimes he held it late at night, wondering how much more of himself he could cut away before nothing was left. But he didn't have time for self-pity. The city was falling apart. Gold. Cloaks clashed with the common folk in the streets daily now. Grain stores were low. Lords hoarded their own supplies. Bandits roamed outside the walls. Emboldened by war and hunger, there were rumors that even the High Septon was considering. Daenerys's claim, the faith had remained quiet too long, a sign that they were waiting for someone else to win. Ned met with the small council. Renly spoke of strengthening the gates, of rallying bannermen, of preparing for siege. Davos urged diplomacy. Varys
whispered warnings of Lannister agents in the Reach stirring rebellion. Too many fires to put out, Ned muttered. Then maybe it's time to start one of our own, Renly said coldly.
If Daenerys wants war, let's strike Dragonstone first. Cut the head before the beast grows wings. No, Ned said. We won't become what we fight. Renly left the chamber with clenched fists, and when he left, he took the Tyrells with him. That same night, a shadow moved through the Red Keep, and 2 guards were found dead near the tower where Arya once slept. She had returned, not as a child, as a whisper. She stood in Ned's chambers, dressed in black, dagger at her side. Her eyes were harder than steel, older, colder. You sent spies to find Jon, she said quietly. I already did, Ned's breath caught. Where? Beyond the wall. He's alive. But he's not just Jon anymore. What is he? He's the thing the realm needs and fears. She stepped forward. He leads wildlings, free folk, Some say they call him the Wolf King. Others say he doesn't age, that he doesn't sleep, that the White Walkers fear him. Is it true? Ned asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Arya just stared at him. He knows who he is now. The silence said the rest. Jon Snow knew he was a Targaryen, and yet he hadn't come south, not to take a throne, not to start a war. He remained beyond the wall, guarding it, defending it, not for glory, but for duty. Ned closed
his eyes. If only the realm knew. But truth was a sword with two edges. Daenerys was still marching.
Her dragons had not yet burned cities, but her message was clear. She would not wait forever. And the moment she landed on Westerosi soil, the people would see her fire and follow, and now Ned had 2 Targaryens on the board, one from ice, one from fire. Both with claim to the throne he never wanted, and both could destroy everything he tried to hold together. As the sun set that night over King's Landing, casting blood-red light across the city, Ned sat on the Iron Throne alone. He remembered Robert's words once, so long ago. The damn thing cuts you every time you sit. Now Ned understood, because it didn't just cut your skin, it carved away your soul. Snow fell in King's Landing. Not just frost or a chill in the wind. Real snow. Soft, white, silent. The kind that covered corpses in the north. It hadn't snowed in the capital in decades. The people stared at the sky like it was an omen, and maybe it was. Ned stood at the balcony of the great hall, watching the flakes gather on the cold stone. "Winter is here," he said, quietly. Behind him, Arya leaned against the wall, sharpening her dagger. "And we're not ready for it." She wasn't wrong. Everything was slipping through his fingers. Renly had declared himself king in the south, naming the Reach and the Stormlands as his kingdom. The Tyrells backed him fully. His banners now flew in Highgarden, and he had the food and gold to hold for a long time. Stannis still held Dragonstone. Though wounded from early losses, he clung to his cause like a drowning man to driftwood. Fire priests now surrounded him, red-robed men and women speaking of visions and gods and a promised prince. Ned didn't trust any of it, but it was Daenerys who worried him most. She had moved from Dragonstone to the Riverlands, gaining followers wherever she went. Her dragons circled above towns like angels of judgment. She burned no villages, not yet, but her presence was fire enough. People bent the knee to her, not just out of fear, but out of faith. She brought hope, and the realm was starving for it. Ned couldn't deny it anymore. She was the people's queen, but her claim was dangerous, because the moment she reached King's Landing she'd expect the crown, and Ned could not give it, not without sparking another civil war. And then came the worst news yet. The wall had fallen. Ravens arrived with broken seals and blood-stained parchment. The dead had breached the wall. The Night's Watch was scattered. Sam Tarly was missing. Jon Snow, or whatever he had become, was the only force between the living and the tide of death. Arya didn't cry when she heard. She just said, "He'll fight. He always does." But Ned wasn't so sure, not anymore, because now the realm wasn't just facing fire or lies or political war. It was facing extinction. That night, Ned met with what remained of his loyal council, Davos, Arya, Meister, Luwin, and a handful of bannermen who still believed in the old ways. He laid the truth bare. "About Jon, about Daenerys, about the dead. We're out of time," he said. "The North has fallen, and we're too broken to fight them alone." "What do we do?" Davos asked, voice low. "We call a meeting, one final council, every king, every queen, every fool who thinks they rule something. We call them to one place, tell them what's coming, make them see." "Where?" Arya asked. "Winterfell," Ned replied. "Where it all began." And so the ravens flew, to Renly, to Stannis, to Daenerys, even to the Lannisters, though their reply was silence. They were invited to the table of truth, to decide the fate of the living. Weeks passed, preparations were made. The North began to gather again, whatever was left of it. Ned travelled, with a small party northward, Arya by his side, Davos ahead arranging security. The road was long, dangerous, but they pressed on. At Moat Cailin a man waited for them, cloaked in black, hair grown long, eyes like winter. Jon Snow. He stood alone, sword strapped to his back, Ghost beside him, larger than ever, white fur streaked with blood. He didn't smile when he saw Ned. "Father?" he said. Ned dismounted slowly. "You've changed." "So have you," Jon replied. And just like that, two men who had once lived under the same roof now stood as rulers, strangers, and maybe enemies. But they were still Starks, and the night was coming. Together they turned north, toward Winterfell, toward the meeting that would decide whether Westeros lived or died. Winterfell had never looked so cold. The ancient castle stood proud against the grey sky, but the warmth it once held for Ned Stark was long gone. This was no homecoming. This was a final stand. Snow blanketed the courtyards. Torches burned against. Thick winds. Banners from across Westeros hung limp in the frost. The stag, the sun, the lion, the rose, the dragon, all summoned under one roof for the first time in history. A great fire had been built in the hall, but even it couldn't thaw the tension in the air. Ned sat at the head of the table, not on a throne, just a chair. He'd left the crown behind in King's Landing. This wasn't about power. It was about survival. To his right sat Jon Snow, silent, eyes tired. He had seen things no man should. Walked with death. Fought with ghosts. The boy who had once been ashamed of his name now carried the weight of the world in his hand. To Ned's left, Arya. Dagger always close, her face unreadable. Then the others entered. Renly Baratheon, dressed in gold and green, smiling like he was at a feast. "You know, I was hoping this would be warmer," he joked. No one laughed. Stannis came next, flanked by red-robed priests. His eyes burned with cold justice. "We are not allies," he said flatly. "This is necessity, nothing more." And then came the fire. The doors opened wide and wind blew out half the torches as Daenerys Targaryen entered. She wore black and red, her silver hair braided tightly. Behind her, Tyrion Lannister, alive somehow, and Ser Jorah Mormont. But it was Drogon circling in the sky that silenced the room. The Dragon Queen didn't bow. She sat. Everyone else followed. Ned stood. "I didn't call you here for crowns," he began, "or to beg for loyalty. I brought you here because the world is ending, and if we don't fight together, there will be no thrones left to claim." Angia looked around the room, every face a piece of history, everyone carrying old grudges. "We've all lost something," he continued.
Family, peace, honor. I've lost more than I care to name, but none of it will matter when the dead march through this door. Stannis scoffed. You expect us to believe tales from behind the wall? You speak of ghosts and monsters while
"Dragons sit at our table?" Jon stood. The room fell silent. "I've seen them," he said. "I've fought them. And they don't care who your father was, or what name you wear. They are death, and they are coming." Renly looked uneasy. Tyrion studied Jon with interest. Daenerys watched him like she knew something he didn't. Then slowly she spoke. "Tell me your name," she said softly. Jon hesitated. Ned looked at him, pleading silently. But Jon met her gaze. "I was born Jon Snow, but my true name is Aegon."
Targaryen! The room exploded. Stannis stood, shouting. Renly cursed. Tyrion's eyes widened with horror. And Daenerys. She didn't move. Her face cracked just a little. Her hand gripped the table. "You're lying," she whispered. Ned stood.
Quickly.
"He's not. I kept it hidden. For his safety. And maybe to protect my own." "You stole his birthright," Dany said, voice shaking. "I saved his life," Ned replied, eyes hard. Jon didn't speak. He just stared at the fire, lost. The
alliance was falling apart before it began. But then a horn blew from the tower. A single, long, mournful sound. Arya was already moving. She climbed the stairs like a shadow and returned minutes later. "They're here," she said. "Everyone."
"Stood? Who?" Stannis asked. Arya looked him in the eye. "The dead."
The dead came like a whisper at first. Silent. Slow. Snow falling with them, covering their approach. But then came the sound. Bones scraping against stone, 1,000 frozen feet shuffling across Winterfell's fields. And the screams. The army of the dead had arrived. Ned stood atop the battlements, the cold biting into his skin, his heart pounding not with fear, but with failure. He had brought them all together, yes, but too late. They had debated bloodlines while death marched. Below, Jon Snow, Aegon, or whatever name he wore now, led the defences. Ghost by his side, blade in hand, he moved like a man possessed. No longer a bastard, no longer a boy. He was something else now, not just a warrior.
A symbol. Arya vanished into the shadows where she fought best. She didn't wait for orders. She never had. Daenerys soared overhead on Drogon, raining fire down on the icy tide. The dragon's flames lit the battlefield like a second sunrise.
But for every white that burned, 10 more took its place. Stannis and his red priest stood near the front lines, chanting in strange tongues, fire bursting from their hands. Renly, armoured and terrified, led a cavalry charge and was torn. From his horse within minutes, inside the walls, chaos. Women screamed, children cried, steel clashed, flesh tore. The Night King, cold, cruel, silent, rode his dead beast high above, watching with hollow eyes. Waiting. Then the walls were breached. Whites poured into Winterfell like water breaking through a dam, and Ned Stark, the king who never wanted a crown, drew his sword and stepped into the madness. He fought alongside common men, alongside strangers. He fought beside Davos, beside Tyrion, even beside Jaime Lannister, who had arrived, with one hand and a heart full of guilt. The past didn't matter anymore, only survival did, but the living were losing. Even Drogon began to falter. Arrows of ice pierced his hide. He roared and fell crashing through the godswood. Daenerys tumbled from his back and landed hard, her
leg broken, her spirit shaking, and the Night King began his descent. Ned saw him from across the yard,
a figure of ice and ancient death. He raised his hand, and hundreds of fallen soldiers rose again, eyes glowing blue. Even friends, even kin. Then Jon saw him too, and ran straight into the storm. Their blades met, ice against steel. Jon fought, with fire in his soul. But the Night King moved like death itself. Every strike from Jon was dodged, parried, countered. The ground cracked beneath them. Ned tried to reach them, but the dead closed in, until Arya came from the shadows.
From nowhere. The dagger in her hand, the same one meant to kill Bran so long ago, plunged into the Night King's chest, and he shattered. Just like that. The dead froze, then crumbled. The battle was over. Winterfell was saved, but not without
cost. Stannis lay dead, Renly torn apart. Tyrion was wounded beyond healing. Daenerys wept over Drogon, who lay dying beneath the weirwood tree. And Ned fell to his knees in the snow, covered in blood, not his own. Jon stood over him. "You knew," he said, "about me, about everything." Ned nodded slowly. "I wanted to protect you."
"Not destroy you." "You lied." "I did," Ned whispered. "And I'd do it again." Jon looked away. Daenerys was carried into the hall, barely conscious. She looked at Jon, then at Ned, and said one thing. "You're both kings. And yet, none of us win." They held a council that night. Fewer now, broken, tired, and Jon spoke first. "No more thrones," he said. "No more crowns. If we survive this, we do not rebuild the same world. We build something better." They asked who
would rule. Jon said nothing. Ned said only this: "Not me." Daenerys couldn't walk. Arya wouldn't stay. And Jon? He returned north, beyond the wall, back to the only place that still felt real, back to where life was fragile and worth protecting. Ned Stark abdicated the crown days later. He returned to Winterfell as a father, not a king. His rule had saved Westeros. But it had cost him nearly everything. He was remembered not as the honest king, not as the Wolf King, but as the man who bore the crown so no one else would have to. And when he died, years later, the realm was at peace. But the scars never left, because peace in Westeros is always borrowed, never owned.